Do you remember those 1970s snacks? The ones that made every lunchbox and Saturday feel a little more special? These were the treats that filled shelves, fueled childhoods, and disappeared before we realized how much we'd missed them. When did something so simple start to taste like memory itself? The Marathon Bar was the king of 1970s candy, 8 glorious inches of chewy caramel covered in thick milk chocolate and twisted into a long, rope-like braid. It was the kind of candy bar that dared you to finish it before your jaw gave up. The wrapper screamed confidence, with bold red lettering and a ruler printed across the front as if to brag about its length. For kids, it was pure magic, a treat that lasted longer than Saturday morning cartoons. The caramel stretched endlessly, pulling into golden ribbons that stuck to your teeth and refused to let go. Parents complained it was too messy, but that was part of the fun. The longer you chewed, the more victory it felt like. Every kid who bought one felt like they had conquered a snack meant for grown-ups. Unfortunately, that size came at a price. It melted in heat, stuck to the wrapper, and was nearly impossible to eat neatly. Still, the Marathon Bar became a symbol of 1970s indulgence. Oversized, sweet, and just a little ridiculous. When it disappeared in the 1980s, it left behind sticky memories of a time when candy wasn't just eaten. It was an adventure. Space food sticks promised to make kids feel like astronauts, but they tasted more like chewy disappointment. Inspired by NASA's space race glory, these energy snacks came in flavors like chocolate, peanut butter, and caramel. Though none of them resembled real food, they looked like short brown tubes and felt like rubber between your teeth. The commercials made them look futuristic, sleek snacks for the space age. But one bite and you realized astronauts probably would have left these on the launch pad. Still, kids loved the idea of eating something approved by NASA, even if it tasted like compressed clay. Lunchboxes across America carried these strange brown sticks tucked between thermoses and sandwiches. Parents called them nutritious, though that mostly meant not candy. In truth, they were neither space food nor a stick worth eating twice. By the end of the decade, they vanished back into the galaxy they came from, remembered fondly only by those who truly believed space travel could make anything cool. Even chewy brown tubes that stuck to your molars. Pizza spins were the ultimate snack lie of the 1970s. Crunchy spirals that claimed to deliver real pizza flavor, but mostly delivered dusty disappointment. The box promised oregano, tomato, and cheese in every bite. But what you actually got was a handful of stale swirls that tasted like old croutons. They were shaped like little spirals, fun to look at and perfect for finger food, but they smelled like someone spilled Italian seasoning on cardboard. Still, for a brief moment, kids believed they were eating something rebellious. Pizza without parental permission. It was junk food disguised as innovation, and it worked for about 5 minutes. Pizza spins became the kind of snack you begged for at the store, but never finished at home. Even the marketing leaned hard into the hip 1970s vibe, pairing them with comic book ads and smiling kids pretending the flavor didn't burn their tongues. They were crunchy, sure, but not in a good way. The kind of crunch that tasted like regret. When they disappeared, no one noticed right away. But decades later, nostalgia gave them a second life as a trivia answer. Pizza spins may have flopped as a snack, but they'll always hold a place in the weird, wonderful heart of 1970s food experiments. Fruit Brute cereal was the odd one out in the monster cereal family, the red-headed stepchild of Count Chocula and Frankenberry. With its artificial cherry flavor and marshmallows that turned milk into a pink swamp, it was more horror than breakfast. Kids wanted to love it. After all, it had a cartoon werewolf on the box. But one spoonful told a different story. The cereal bits were crunchy at first, but quickly dissolved into mush, while the cherry taste clung to your mouth like cough syrup. Parents hated the sugar content, but kids loved the chaos of neon milk and monster mascots. It was a cereal that looked fun, but tasted like regret. Even though it didn't last long, Fruit Brute gained cult status among collectors and horror fans who remembered the box more fondly than the flavor. Its limited run made it a time capsule of 1970s cereal madness when every brand tried to out-weird the other. If you ever wonder why nostalgia tastes better than reality, just remember, Fruit Brute was proof that some monsters belong in the cereal aisle's graveyard. Planters. Cheese balls were bright orange, perfectly round, and unapologetically artificial, the ultimate party snack of the 1970s. They came in tall blue cans that popped open with a puff of cheese-scented air strong enough to clear the room. The first handful was heaven. Light, crunchy, and salty in all the right ways. By the second handful, though, your fingers were glowing orange, your face shiny, and your dignity gone. Every couch cushion, remote, and phone cord bore the evidence of your addiction. It was cheese dust that claimed everything it touched. Parents bought them for gatherings, kids devoured them during television marathons, and nobody could stop once they started. The taste was unmistakable. That tangy, fake cheddar goodness that coated your mouth for hours. Planters' cheese balls were chaos in a can, a snack that didn't pretend to be healthy or classy. When they disappeared, fans protested for decades until Planters finally brought them back, proving that sometimes you really can't improve on bright orange perfection. Peanut butter boppers were what happened when candy and chaos teamed up in the 1970s. These tube-shaped peanut butter snacks were coated in chocolate or nuts and sold as energy food, though the only energy they provided came from sugar highs. Kids loved the idea, portable peanut butter you could eat with your hands. But the heat of a lunchbox turned them into soft, oily grenades waiting to explode. Unwrapping one meant getting peanut butter on everything from your fingers to your jeans. Still, for those first few bites, they were glorious, sweet, salty, and completely over the top. Boppers didn't last long, mostly because they melted faster than ice cream and had the shelf life of a banana. But for a brief, sticky moment in time, they were the snack of the future, indulgent, impractical, and absolutely unforgettable. Today, they live on in memory as the most delicious disaster the 1970s ever produced. Kugel-flavored peanut spread was the decade's weirdest experiment in breakfast innovation. It was peanut butter, but with added flavors like banana, cinnamon, chocolate, and vanilla. The commercials called it groovy and fun, but the reality was closer to confusing and why does my toast taste like perfume? Each flavor fought the other for attention, turning every bite into an identity crisis. The texture was oily yet gritty, sticking to the roof of your mouth like glue mixed with sugar. Parents hated it, kids loved it, and everyone's kitchen cupboard smelled faintly like regret. Kugel's bright, space-age jars promised excitement but delivered chaos. It was a product that perfectly captured the experimental spirit of the 1970s, bold, colorful, and slightly misguided. Within a few years, it vanished from stores, but the name lives on as a nostalgic punchline. Kugel wasn't just peanut butter. It was peanut butter that went too far. Snack pack pudding in metal cans was the ultimate school lunch flex, until someone inevitably cut their tongue on the lid. Before the days of easy plastic cups, kids had to peel back razor-sharp metal tops to get to that rich, gooey chocolate gold. It was worth it, though. That clink of the lid hitting the table was the sound of dessert victory, a moment of pure cafeteria envy. Some kids even licked the lid despite the danger, because nothing was wasted when chocolate was involved. It was the kind of reckless joy that made childhood feel invincible, one spoonful at a time. The first spoonful felt like victory, creamy, sweet, and just the right amount of indulgent. Of course, the second spoonful usually came with a metallic aftertaste, a reminder that this was dessert with danger. Teachers hated cleaning up the mess, but no kid would trade it for anything else. Snack pack pudding made cafeteria tables feel like five-star dining, especially when paired with a warm carton of milk. The cans were heavy, the labels loud, and the sugar content legendary. It was childhood rebellion in dessert form, proof that risk and reward could fit neatly inside a lunchbox. Screaming yellow zonkers were snacks for the weird kids, caramel popcorn in a black and yellow box covered with absurd jokes and random nonsense. Unlike Cracker Jack, there was no prize inside. The humor was the reward. It was one of the first snacks to market itself with attitude instead of flavor. Each box read like a comedy skit with lines that made no sense but made you laugh anyway. It was marketing so strange that adults didn't know if it was for kids or for philosophers. Eating it felt like being in on a private joke the rest of the world didn't get. The popcorn itself was oddly addictive, sweet, buttery, and just crunchy enough to keep you hooked. But the box was the real star, filled with bizarre copywriting that made you laugh even if you didn't get it. It was marketing genius disguised as mayhem. Screaming yellow zonkers didn't pretend to be healthy or even particularly tasty. It was all about fun, sarcasm, and breaking the rules. Kids loved it, parents were baffled, and the brand became a cult classic for anyone who appreciated snacks that didn't take themselves too seriously. It was the 1970s in a nutshell. Weird, loud, and too funny to forget. Pudding Pops were the smooth, creamy dream that melted far too fast. Marketed as frozen pudding on a stick, they promised decadence for kids who wanted dessert on the go. They were rich, chocolatey, and oddly dense, somewhere between ice cream and frosting. When you pulled one from the freezer, frost crystals sparkled like treasure. The first bite snapped clean, then melted slowly into sweet, velvety bliss. But in 10 minutes flat, it became a sticky race against time, dripping faster than you could chase it with napkins. The first bite was heaven, cold and velvety, but by the second, they were melting faster than you could finish. Sticky hands, drippy chins, and stained shirts were the true legacy of Pudding Pops. Still, the flavor was worth every napkin in the box. For a generation of 1970s and 1980s kids, Pudding Pops were the ultimate after-school reward, proof that comfort food didn't have to make sense to be loved. They disappeared quietly from freezer aisles, but every nostalgic bite remembered today tastes like childhood, messy, sweet, and gone too soon. Danish go-rounds were the toaster pastries that walked so Pop-Tarts could run. They looked promising in their foil packs, thin rectangles of pastry filled with fruit jam and drizzled with icing. But the dream ended the second they hit your mouth. The crust was dry enough to start a fire, and the filling had the consistency of lava-flavored glue. The smell out of the toaster was incredible, all warm fruit and buttered sugar, tricking you into thinking something wonderful was coming. Then came the bite, flaky on the outside, scorching on the inside, pure betrayal all the way through. The icing looked elegant, but it vanished into nothing after a single chew. If you toasted them too little, they were stiff as cardboard. Too long, and they turned into edible roof shingles. The fruit inside wasn't really fruit. It was a runny, red mystery that tasted like sugar pretending to be strawberries. Even the icing melted into a dull, sticky smear. The commercials bragged about real bakery taste, but no bakery would claim ownership of these disasters. Parents kept buying them because they were cheap, and kids kept eating them because the alternative was oatmeal. Then came Pop-Tarts, shinier, tastier, and actually edible. Overnight, Danish go-rounds were toast. Still, they deserve credit for trying. If not for flavor, then for proving that breakfast could be as convenient as it was disappointing. Peanut butter and jelly in a can was one of those 1970s ideas that sounded convenient but ended in chaos. The concept was simple: a pre-mixed spread combining both peanut butter and jelly so you could skip a step. But what came out of that can was a pinkish-brown sludge that defied the laws of appetite. The texture looked like someone blended lunch and regret. It came out in thick ribbons that made every sandwich look like a crime scene. Even the smell, part sweet, part salty, part metallic, could ruin your appetite before the first bite. The peanut butter was oily, the jelly was grainy, and somehow they canceled each other out completely. It smelled like someone's lunchbox left in the sun. Even worse, it came in a metal can, so you had to open it like dog food before slathering it on bread. Ads called it a modern miracle for busy families, which was marketing code for please ignore the texture. Kids hated it. Adults pretended it was fine. And eventually, everyone went back to the normal way: 2 jars, 1 knife, and 0 shame. Peanut butter and jelly in a can was proof that some things in life just aren't meant to be simplified. Hubba Bubba. Original gum came with one bold promise: no stick, a claim that turned out to be as true as disco, lasting forever. It arrived in bright pink bricks, soft and chewy, with a flavor that could knock your taste buds into next week. But that sweetness lasted about 30 seconds before fading into rubbery silence. The smell alone could fill a classroom: sweet, fruity, and slightly chemical, the scent of every 1970s childhood in one inhale. The moment it hit your tongue, you were transported straight to the playground, ready to blow bubbles the size of your face. And when it inevitably popped, you'd spend the next hour scraping pink goo out of your hair and laughing about it anyway. And as for that no stick guarantee, tell that to every kid who spent a Saturday night scraping Hubba Bubba out of their hair or braces. Teachers hated it, dentists loathed it, and barbers made small fortunes cutting it out of ponytails. Still, there was something magical about unwrapping that block and blowing a bubble big enough to cover your entire face. The texture was perfect for bubble making, even if it did glue itself to everything you loved. Hubba Bubba became a playground legend, a sticky, sugary rebellion that lived on the lips and sneakers of an entire generation. It may not have kept its promise, but it gave the 1970s the biggest bubbles anyone had ever seen. Taco Doritos were the original chip that started it all. The first bold step before nacho cheese took over the world. They hit shelves in the early 1970s, promising authentic taco flavor, though that description was generous. The chips were dusted with a faint brown powder that smelled vaguely like cumin and disappointment. Open a bag and you'd get a wave of nostalgia mixed with a scent that could best be described as mystery spice. Some claimed they could taste lettuce and beef in every bite, while others swore it was just seasoned air. Still, there was something strangely comforting about that mild, taco-adjacent flavor that kept people coming back. They had the essence of tacos, if your taco came from a dream you half remembered. The flavor was faint, but the crunch was everything: loud, satisfying, and oddly addictive. Even when you couldn't quite place what you were tasting, you kept eating. Fans claimed they were the perfect blend of nostalgia and seasoning dust. Others said they just tasted like salty corn with identity issues. Eventually, nacho cheese arrived and stole the spotlight, pushing Taco Doritos into snack history. Still, for anyone who grew up in the 1970s, that first crinkly orange bag remains a symbol of a simpler time, when tacos came in chip form and every flavor was still finding its way. The Reggie bar was pure 1970s excess wrapped in gold foil and named after baseball's biggest ego. Created to celebrate Reggie Jackson, it promised the candy bar as big as the man himself. Inside was a mash of caramel, peanuts, and chocolate that tasted suspiciously like a baby Ruth wearing a celebrity disguise. The commercials played during games, with Reggie himself beaming proudly as kids unwrapped his namesake treat. Fans didn't care if it was just another chocolate bar. They were buying a piece of their hero. For a moment, it felt like eating fame was actually possible, one sticky bite at a time. Every bite stuck to your teeth and your pride, but that didn't stop fans from buying it by the box. Stadiums sold them during games, and Reggie himself tossed them into crowds like sugary trophies. It wasn't about the flavor. It was about eating fame, one chewy mouthful at a time. Kids who didn't even know baseball wanted to try one just to see what success tasted like. The candy bar faded with Reggie's career, but for a brief moment, it was America's most edible ego trip. The Reggie bar didn't change candy. It just proved that in the 1970s, celebrity could sell anything, even a melted mess in a shiny wrapper. Wacky Packages stickers were the schoolyard obsession that made fun of everything adults took seriously. Kids lined up at corner stores to buy packs filled with parodies of real products, like Crust toothpaste or Band-Aid bandages, and a rock-hard stick of gum that tasted like cardboard dipped in sugar. The gum cracked, splintered, and dissolved faster than your allowance, but no one cared. Kids traded the stickers like baseball cards, arguing over which designs were the funniest or grossest. The satire hit a sweet spot between silly and subversive, making kids feel clever for getting the joke. Parents thought they were nonsense, which only made them more desirable. The stickers were the real prize: gross, clever, and just the right amount of rebellious. Kids stuck them on lunchboxes, notebooks, and their parents' walls, sparking decades of arguments and laughter. Each pack cost just a few cents, but collecting them became a lifelong mission for 1970s kids who loved mischief. They captured the weird humor of the decade perfectly: sarcastic, bold, and unapologetically fun. The gum may have been a dental hazard, but wacky packages were proof that kids didn't need sugar to get addicted. Just satire, imagination, and a good sticker. Potato skins. Potato snacks were marketed as the healthy alternative to chips, which was like calling lava a warm bath. They were made from real baked potato skins, giving them the illusion of being wholesome. In reality, they were just salty, crunchy slabs of sodium that made you crave a gallon of water. They came in flavors like cheddar and bacon, sour cream, and even loaded potato, which all somehow tasted like plain salt with attitude. The texture was oddly thick, giving every bite a satisfying crunch followed by instant thirst. Bars and bowling alleys loved them because they kept people buying drinks. The flavor options, cheddar, bacon, and ranch, sounded sophisticated until you realized they all tasted the same. The packaging bragged about natural ingredients, which really meant we used potatoes once. Still, they had an addictive crunch that kept people reaching for more. Bars loved serving them, and teenagers devoured them during late-night movie marathons. They were messy, greasy, and crumbly in all the right ways, fake health food that didn't even pretend too hard. Eventually, they disappeared from shelves, but their memory lingers as the perfect example of 1970s snack deception. Pretend it's good for you, and you can eat twice as much. Toffee candy, or toffee if you're fancy, looked like something you'd find in your grandmother's candy dish. Shiny, round, and way too elegant for kids. It was a hazelnut surrounded by caramel, filled with chocolate cream and topped with a glossy chocolate cap. The commercials promised sophistication, but most Americans just wondered why it wasn't an M&M. You couldn't eat it fast. It demanded patience and dental strength. The caramel shell clung stubbornly to your molars like it was testing your commitment. Even the name toffee sounded foreign enough to make it feel fancier than it really was. The first bite was confusing: chewy, nutty, and oddly bland. The caramel stuck to your teeth like glue, forcing you to chew through every ounce of regret. Even adults admitted they bought it once, ate half the box, and left the rest for the next holiday. It was imported from Germany, where people apparently enjoyed dental challenges disguised as dessert. Toffee wanted to be fancy, but it ended up as the candy you gave to someone you didn't know well. Still, its golden box and strange design made it memorable, a little piece of European confusion sitting proudly on 1970s candy shelves. Giggles cookies looked like fun. 2 round sandwich cookies with smiling faces cut into the top. Inside was a gooey mix of fudge and cream that promised joy with every bite. But somehow, those grinning faces made the whole thing feel unsettling. The cookie smiles were too perfect, frozen in a way that made them look like they knew something you didn't. Kids joked that they laughed when you weren't looking. Even the commercial jingle, full of forced laughter, made the cookies seem just a little too happy to be eaten. The smiles never matched the taste, a chalky, overly sweet crunch that stuck to your teeth. Kids either loved them or swore the cookies stared back. Even the commercials, full of laughter and bright colors, couldn't make them less creepy. Still, they were everywhere for a few short years, showing up in lunchboxes and after-school snacks across the country. They had the charm of a novelty that ran out fast. Fun once, strange forever. When they disappeared, few people complained, but everyone remembered those haunting cookie faces. Giggles proved that not every smiling snack brings happiness. Sometimes it just makes you question dessert. Hostess Choco Bliss Cakes were the 1970s most decadent sugar bomb, a double-layered chocolate overload that managed to make even chocoholics pause. Each one was coated in fudge, filled with more fudge and stacked on fudge-like cake. One bite felt like diving headfirst into a vat of cocoa. They were so dense that they could double as paperweights, yet somehow irresistible. The glossy surface shimmered under cafeteria lights like it had been polished for presentation. You didn't eat a Choco Bliss, you survived it. The texture was dense and sticky, like eating dessert cement. Even die-hard Hostess fans admitted they needed milk, or mercy, to finish one. But that first bite, it was pure euphoria, rich and unapologetically sweet. These cakes turned lunchboxes into treasure chests and after-school snacks into sugar-fueled adventures. They were everything the 1970s loved, indulgent, over-the-top, and blissfully artificial. Eventually, even Hostess had to admit they'd gone too far and retired them quietly. But for anyone who lived through it, Choco Bliss wasn't just dessert. It was a challenge, a memory, and the ultimate test of how much chocolate one human could handle. Oreo Big Stuff was the cookie that asked, what if one Oreo could feed a family of 4? And somehow, Nabisco said yes. It was massive. One giant Oreo stuffed with enough creme to drown in. When you first saw it, it was glorious. A dream come true for anyone who ever twisted open a regular Oreo and wished there was more. But then you tried to eat it. The ratio of cookie to filling was all wrong. It was like chewing through a sugary mattress wedged between 2 chocolate manhole covers. Every bite oozed frosting that coated your fingers, your plate, and probably your soul. Kids loved the size, parents loved the novelty, and dentists loved the job security. The Big Stuff came individually wrapped, practically a meal in itself. It wasn't a snack, it was an experience, one that required a napkin, a knife, and possibly an intervention. The commercials made it look heroic, but in real life, it was a logistical nightmare. You couldn't dunk it in milk unless you had a bucket, and breaking it apart just made a mess. Within a few short years, Oreo quietly retired it, realizing maybe there really was such a thing as too much of a good thing. But for those who remember it, the Oreo Big Stuff remains the ultimate 1980s excess, sweet, silly, and far too big for its own good. Pronto Pudding Mix was supposed to revolutionize dessert, a powdered mix that required nothing but water to create a creamy, rich treat. No milk, no effort, promised the box, which should have been the first red flag. The result was a gloopy, semi-translucent blob that tasted more like disappointment than dessert. The texture hovered somewhere between spackle and regret, coating spoons in a gluey film. Even chocolate flavor couldn't hide the taste of chalk and chemicals. Kids would take one bite, wrinkle their noses, and politely ask for actual pudding next time. The advertisements showed happy families smiling around bowls of smooth perfection, but every real-life serving looked like something scraped off a cafeteria tray. It was the kind of dessert you made once just to see if it really worked, and then never again. People tried doctoring it up with whipped cream, bananas, or even instant coffee, but nothing could save it. Pronto pudding became the punchline of dinner parties, a culinary experiment that proved water and hope are not a recipe for flavor. When it finally disappeared from shelves, no one complained. They just quietly switched back to the kind of pudding that respected the concept of dairy. Aspen Soda was Pepsi's bizarre attempt to capture the fresh taste of crisp apples in a can, and it confused everyone who tried it. It sounded simple, apple-flavored soda, like cider with fizz. But the first sip felt like a betrayal. It wasn't sweet enough to be a soda, not tart enough to be cider, and not refreshing enough to be anything else. The flavor hit you like a chemical breeze, sharp and metallic, with a weird cinnamon aftertaste that lingered like regret. The smell was overpowering. Part air freshener, part cough syrup. Kids thought it was grown up, adults thought it was punishment, and no one could finish a whole can. Pepsi's marketing team leaned into the cool mountain vibe, showing people skiing and smiling while sipping Aspen. But the product had more altitude than attitude. It fizzed aggressively, as if trying to make up for the lack of actual taste. The clear soda trend of the 1970s and 1980s didn't help either. People wanted purity, not confusion in a can. Within a few short years, Aspen vanished, replaced by Pepsi's other failed experiments in fruit innovation. But ask anyone who remembers it and they'll tell you the same thing. It wasn't bad, it was just wrong. Aspen soda wasn't refreshing. It was proof that even Pepsi couldn't make apples exciting. Chipwich ice cream sandwiches were nothing short of revolutionary when they hit the shelves. Ice cream wedged between two chocolate chip cookies, then rolled in chocolate chips for good measure. For kids, it was like discovering the holy grail of frozen treats. The commercials promised a handheld dessert that was fun, indulgent, and portable. But reality was a little messier. The moment you picked one up, the ice cream began its slow, inevitable melt, turning your hands into sticky chocolate swamps. The cookies were frozen solid, hard enough to crack a tooth until the second they thawed, when they instantly fell apart. Eating one required strategy, timing, and several napkins. Still, the taste made it worth every smear and drip. The sweetness of the cookies, the cold ice cream, and the crunch of chocolate chips blended into pure summer bliss. They were the crown jewels of the neighborhood ice cream truck, a dollar well spent and a memory worth every stain. Parents hated the cleanup, but kids didn't care. The chaos was part of the charm. Chipwiches eventually returned in the 2000s, but nothing could match that first bite from a 1970s original, eaten too fast on a hot day before it melted completely. Chipwich wasn't just dessert, it was an event, one you wore on your face long after it was gone. Viennetta ice cream loaf was elegance frozen in time, the dessert that made every 1970s family feel like they had just stepped into a European cafe. It wasn't just ice cream, it was art. Thin, delicate layers of vanilla and chocolate folded into one another like edible lace, all stacked into a wavy masterpiece. The commercials were pure drama, close-ups of spoons breaking through glossy chocolate sheets as orchestral music played in the background. In reality, it was just ice cream, but it looked expensive, and that was enough. Families saved it for special occasions, serving slices like it was fine pastry. The texture was smooth, creamy, and perfectly portioned, a rare moment when something looked as good as it tasted. But the real luxury came from presentation. Pulling a Viennetta out of your freezer in front of guests instantly raised your social status by at least 2 points. It was the dessert that made every suburban dinner party feel like an event, a sweet illusion of sophistication in loaf form. Even decades later, the name Viennetta still carries a kind of quiet nostalgia, a reminder of when dessert could make you feel fancy, even if you were still sitting at a plastic-covered dining table. For a generation of dreamers, Viennetta was elegance you could serve with a spoon. Soy Victory sausage was one of the strangest meats to line shelves during the 1940s. With real meat in short supply, companies blended soy flour, fillers, and scraps into sausages that were meant to stretch rations further. These sausages often looked the part, but once cooked, they revealed their odd texture and flavor. Many described them as rubbery or bland, but they were cheap and filling, and that mattered more than taste. The government promoted them as patriotic, urging families to embrace soy as a way to help win the war. Cookbooks included recipes that added onions, breadcrumbs, or herbs to improve the flavor. Families learned to slice them into casseroles or stews where the strangeness could be hidden. For many, it was their first real exposure to soy as food, and it stuck in memory as both peculiar and necessary. Soy sausages never became a beloved staple, but they were a symbol of sacrifice at the dinner table. Canned Vienna sausages were never about taste. They were about having something, anything, on the shelf when everything else was gone. They came in small cans, floating in mystery liquid, and were eaten with crackers, straight from the tin or sliced into beans or rice. Used to be 50 cents a can. Now they are well over $1 and shrinking. You open the can and wonder where the rest of them went. Vienna sausages were poor people food, survival food, end of the month, no shame, full stomach food. Now they cost enough to make you hesitate, and that hesitation says everything. You do not buy them because they taste good. You buy them because they keep you fed, but even that small comfort now comes with sticker shock. The light bright itself was already a showstopper. Plug it in, stick colored pegs into a black screen, and watch your artwork light up. But here is the kicker. Most kids only had the basic set. Rich kids had the extra refill packs. That meant more templates, more colors, more options. Unicorns, rocket ships, zoo animals, you name it. The refill packs were not cheap. You had to buy them separately, and once they were used, that was it. No do-overs. They had enough pegs to make a light bright zoo, a light bright city, a light bright universe. Their templates were rotated weekly, like gallery installations. Meanwhile, your set still had 2 missing red pegs and a sun that was mostly blue. So most of us rationed them like gold. 1 template per month maybe. But if your family had money, you went through them like printer paper. You would visit a friend's house and see 10 finished light bright templates pinned to their bedroom wall, full gallery mode. And meanwhile, yours still had that same flower pattern you made 6 months ago. But even if you did not have the extras, you still loved the idea. There was something special about watching your design light up in the dark, even if it was the same one every time. It sat there in the glass case, glowing like a little mystery. A mood ring. In the 1970s, it was more than jewelry. It was magic. You were told it could read your emotions, shift color with your feelings, tell the truth when even you could not. Blue for calm, black for nervous, green for whatever you were pretending to feel that day. You saved for weeks, dug through couch cushions, skipped snacks at school, and when you finally had enough, you walked to that kiosk and picked out the perfect one, slipped it on your finger and stared, waiting for it to tell you something deep about yourself. Of course, it never really worked the way the ads claimed. But that was not the point. It made you feel seen. Like maybe you were not just a jumble of hormones and daydreams, but someone whose feelings mattered enough to change colors. You showed it off to friends. You compared shades. You panicked when it turned black and laughed when it turned red. It was silly, it was fun, and it was yours. A little mood tracker from a decade that was all about discovering who you really were. Puffed rice or puffed wheat cereal was another grocery item poor kids could not forget. It came in giant plastic bags, so big they barely fit into the pantry. The cereal itself was bland, light, and tasted like cardboard without help. But it was cheap and lasted forever. Mothers dumped heaps of sugar on top just to make it palatable, turning breakfast into a half-sweet, half-grain ritual. Kids would crunch through mountains of it, sometimes soggy, sometimes stale, but always there in the morning. The sound of that oversized bag crinkling was part of every poor family's kitchen soundtrack. It did not come in colorful boxes with prizes or mascots, but it filled bellies for pennies. Families bought it by the sack because it stretched across countless mornings. Looking back, it might not have been anyone's favorite, but it was dependable, and every poor kid remembered it. Mock banana extract was a curious invention that speaks volumes about shortages in the 1940s. With imported bananas cut off during the war, Americans had to say goodbye to their favorite tropical fruit. But clever chemists came up with a substitute, flavoring made from plants like fig or banana squash, bottled and sold as mock banana extract. It was meant for baking, so pies, cakes, and puddings could still carry a hint of banana taste, even if no bananas were in sight. The flavor was strange, sharp, and not quite right, but for families desperate to hold on to familiar recipes, it became a fixture in pantries. Homemakers swapped tips on how to blend it with sugar or vanilla to mask the odd aftertaste. Children who grew up with it often said it tasted fake once they finally had a real banana again. Still, in its moment, it was a small miracle, something to bridge the gap between loss and normalcy. Today, the idea of fake banana made from fig extract sounds odd, but back then, it was a strange solution to a very real problem. Powdered milk was never fun, but it was cheap. It sat in the pantry as a backup, a survival tool for cereal, baking, or when you ran out of the real thing. It was clumpy, weird, and had a strange aftertaste. But it worked, and it used to cost next to nothing. Now, a box or canister of powdered milk can run $8, $9, sometimes $10. That is not a backup. That is a commitment. And for families that relied on it during lean times, that change is hard to swallow. It used to be a staple for emergencies. Now it is priced like protein powder. You would think something that tastes like chalk would at least stay affordable. But nope. Even powdered milk has joined the inflation parade. Before they became a full-blown craze in the 1980s, Cabbage Patch Kids started as something far more rare and far more expensive. The early prototypes were handmade, cloth dolls called Little People, created by a young artist named Xavier Roberts, and only the richest families got them. These were not mass-produced toys from the shelf. These were boutique, soft sculpture dolls you adopted, literally. They came with birth certificates, backstories, and price tags that made your parents scoff and walk away. But if someone in your class had one, it was a big deal. You did not just own a Cabbage Patch Kid. You were its parent. You cradled it, named it, introduced it to friends. And that level of attachment, it made the rest of us feel like we were missing something. Our dolls came from supermarket aisles and yard sales. Theirs came in fancy boxes with custom signatures. These early dolls were not toys. They were art. And when the craze exploded a few years later, those rich kids got to say, "I had one before they were popular." Of course they did. They always did. Powdered potato flakes in cardboard boxes were the budget version of mashed potatoes, and poor families kept them in steady rotation. The box promised light and fluffy potatoes in minutes, but the taste often had a faint chemical tang that no amount of butter or salt could hide. Still, they were fast, cheap, and made it easy to stretch a meal when fresh potatoes were too expensive or had already sprouted in the sack. Some kids swore they preferred them because they were smoother than lumpy homemade potatoes, though most secretly longed for the real thing. The smell when you opened the box was oddly comforting, even if the taste never lived up to the promise. The cardboard packaging always sagged after a while, spilling flakes in the cupboard like snow. The powder itself looked like snow and puffed dust into the air when you stirred it into hot water. Sometimes the mixture came out runny, sometimes so thick it could stand up on its own, but kids ate it anyway. Covered in gravy, it was almost convincing, and after a while you stopped noticing the difference. For poor families in the 1970s, powdered potato flakes were not about flavor. They were about survival, and every kid remembers them piled high on dinner plates. The line wrapped around the block. You were not even sure what you were waiting for, but everyone said it was going to change everything. In 1977, Star Wars was not just a movie. It was an event. You stood with your friends, nervous with excitement, wondering how a space movie could be that good. Some kids came dressed in makeshift costumes. Others just held onto their ticket stubs like they were gold. You waited and waited. And when the doors finally opened, it felt like stepping into another universe. Lightsabers, spaceships, a villain in all black whose breathing haunted your dreams. It was loud. It was fast. It was unlike anything you had ever seen before. And the moment it ended, you knew you had to see it again. It was not just about the story. It was about what it made you feel. Like the world had just gotten bigger. You bought the action figures. You argued over who was cooler, Han Solo or Luke Skywalker. And for weeks afterward, kids would hum the theme in the hallways, turning pencils into blasters and backpacks into spaceships. That first time? Unforgettable. Because that movie did not just blow your mind, it changed the world. The regular Lincoln Logs were already something special. Those smooth, notched pieces of wood that clicked together into cabins and forts, every kid loved them. But the giant Frontier set? That was a whole different league. This thing came in a massive box, filled to the brim with hundreds of logs, roofs, chimneys, and all the accessories needed to build your own village. Not just a cabin, a settlement. And rich kids had them all. They would dump the whole set onto their clean playroom floor and start building like pioneers with a trust fund. The rest of us maybe had a small tin with a dozen pieces that barely made a fence. But the giant Frontier set? You could make entire battle scenes. It had extra long logs, green roof slats, plastic figures, even little horses and wagons. These were not just toys. They were a historical reenactment in your living room. The box said ages 4 and up, but you needed a good 15 feet of floor space just to use the whole set properly. Rich kids would invite you over, let you build one wall, then take over. It was always their fort, their rules. And even though you told yourself it was just wood, it still felt like they had more imagination just because they could build more. That is what these sets did. They made creativity feel like something you had to buy in bulk. Pinto beans by the pound were always the secret weapon. $1 could get you a bag that made a pot big enough to feed a family for days. You soaked them, seasoned them, and served them with rice, tortillas, or cornbread. Now that same bag is closer to $2 or even $3 in some stores. And the big bulk bags? Not much cheaper by comparison. Beans were supposed to be immune. They were humble, practical, honest food. Now they are quietly climbing up the price ladder. And when even dry beans start to feel expensive, it makes you nervous. Because beans were the plan when the plan failed. And if those cost too much, what is left? Soy victory bread was yet another patriotic twist on grocery shopping in the 1940s. With wheat rationed and demand high, bakers added soy flour to bread dough to stretch supplies. It was promoted as healthier, more nutritious, and part of the war effort. Posters proudly declared, "Eat soy bread, save wheat for the front," tying every slice directly to the fight overseas. Some homemakers swore by its denser texture, but many admitted that the flavor was heavy and unappealing. Children often complained that it was nothing like the soft white loaves they had grown up with. Loaves looked familiar, but the taste was slightly off, described as heavier and denser than regular bread. Ads told families that eating victory bread was a way to help win the war, making every slice feel symbolic. Homemakers served it proudly, even as children turned up their noses. For some, it was their first encounter with soy as a staple ingredient. Once the war ended, soy bread faded from shelves, replaced by the fluffy white loaves people had missed. Victory bread is remembered today as both strange and deeply tied to the sacrifices of the 1940s. Instant mashed potatoes used to be the cheapest way to fake real comfort. Just add water, maybe some butter, and suddenly you had a side dish that looked like dinner came together on purpose. They were shelf-stable, family-sized, and cheap. $1 or less for a box that lasted weeks. Now those same boxes are $2 or $3, and the portion sizes have somehow shrunk while the price tags grew. Even store brands have edged up into "wait, what?" territory. And that is not even counting the loaded kinds with cheese or bacon flavoring. They are practically deluxe now. For people who used to grab 3 boxes without blinking, that is a shift. It means thinking twice about something you once relied on. Something that filled your plate when there was not much else to serve. Sure, they are still fast, still easy, still kind of taste like cardboard fluff, but the good kind. But now they are a backup plan with a budget. Even fake potatoes are not cheap anymore. These were not just toys. They were explosions with permission slips. Model rocket launch sets in the 1970s were the holy grail of cool. You got a tube, some fins, a nose cone, and most importantly, a real engine. You could build it, paint it, and watch it launch hundreds of feet into the sky. But they were not cheap, and they were not sold just anywhere. You needed adult supervision, wide open spaces, and money for replacement engines. That meant most kids never got to launch one. Rich kids, though, they had the whole setup. They would bring them to school science fairs or launch them at the park on weekends with their parents filming from the sidelines. You could hear the countdown and your heart would pound, even if it was not your rocket. It was the kind of moment you would remember for the rest of your life, just watching. The blast-off made you feel like something bigger was always just out of reach. The rest of us just stood back, hoping to feel the whoosh as it lifted off. And when that rocket cracked through the clouds and left a trail of smoke behind, it felt like freedom, like possibility, like everything you wanted but could not quite reach. Every Saturday, you knew exactly where to be, right in front of the television, volume up, watching teenagers just like you dance live on national television. American Bandstand was more than just a show. It was a movement. Hosted by Dick Clark with his perfect hair and easy charm, it made you believe anything was possible. The music was new, the energy electric. It brought the hottest records straight into your living room and showed you how to move to them. You would watch the dancers closely, what they wore, how they stepped, and then try to copy it the next time you were out. In the 1970s, Bandstand was the cultural compass. It set trends, it shaped playlists, and most importantly, it made you feel connected to something bigger than your town or your school. Watching it felt like being part of a club where everyone was young, wild, and ready to dance. It was the original social network. No comments section, no filters, just rhythm and style and sweat. You would hum the songs for the rest of the day. You would dream about being one of those kids on screen. And for that hour, you were. Plastic butter tubs in the fridge were the universal sign of a poor kid's household in the 1970s. No family on a budget had real Tupperware stacked neatly in their refrigerator. It was always Country Crock, Parquet, or Blue Bonnet tubs that had long since been emptied of margarine. The minute you lifted one out, you knew it was a gamble. You might get mashed potatoes, beans, leftover chili, or the dreaded mystery stew your mom had made by tossing in whatever was left from the week. Kids everywhere knew the disappointment of reaching for what you thought was butter for your toast, only to open the lid and find green beans floating in broth. These tubs never sealed perfectly, so the fridge often carried a faint smell of onions and gravy. Yet families swore by them because they were free, durable, and endlessly reusable. They stacked easily in cupboards, filled with everything from lunches to cookies for road trips. Taking potato salad to a picnic? You brought it in a butter tub. Nobody batted an eye because that was normal. The bright yellow lids became part of the scenery of poor kitchens everywhere, reminding kids that when you had little, you made the most of everything. Canned tripe was another 1940s grocery item that feels unusual today. Tripe, the stomach lining of cows, was inexpensive and high in protein, making it a wartime staple. Canned versions appeared on shelves, marketed as ready-to-cook or pre-cooked convenience meals. Some recipes suggested frying it with onions or stewing it with tomatoes, trying to make the chewy texture more appealing. Immigrant families who were already familiar with tripe often embraced it, but for others, it was a jarring new addition to the dinner table. Advertisers tried to market it as hearty and wholesome, but no slogan could make it popular with kids. Ads promoted it as traditional, nutritious, and thrifty, even though many Americans had never eaten it before. Recipes for tripe stew or fried tripe appeared in community cookbooks, showing how homemakers adapted to make it palatable. The texture was chewy and the flavor polarizing, but families learned to live with it. Some immigrant communities already enjoyed tripe, but for many others, it became a strange necessity of the times. Once the war ended, canned tripe quickly disappeared, leaving behind memories of one of the most unusual proteins of the decade. Frozen fish sticks were once a weeknight hack. You could feed the family, serve them with fries, and still come in under budget. The box was big, the sticks were crispy-ish, and no one asked what kind of fish it actually was. You dipped it in ketchup or tartar sauce and called it done. That box that used to cost $3? It is closer to $7 now. And the sticks are smaller, thinner, more breading, less fish. Even the bargain brands have gone up. And it is not like anyone thought frozen fish sticks were top-tier cuisine. They were there for the nights when you had no energy, no plan, and no money. But now, they are part of the inflation club. You still eat them, you still sort of enjoy them, but you cannot ignore the price anymore. Even fake fish got expensive. If you saw one of these leaning against a kid's garage, you knew they were living a different life. The Sears 10-speed Free Spirit was not just a bicycle, it was an upgrade. Taller, sleeker, and built for long rides, this thing looked like it came with a training manual. And unlike your single-speed hand-me-down, this had gears, 10 of them. That meant you could coast up hills while everyone else was walking theirs to the top. But bikes like this did not come cheap. They were department store royalty. Rich kids got them for birthdays, milestones, or just because. The paint never chipped, the chain never squeaked, and the kid riding it always looked like they had somewhere important to be, even if they were just circling the cul-de-sac. And when they pulled up to school, they parked them like prized possessions. You did not dare lean your bike next to theirs. It just looked wrong. These bikes were made for smooth roads, summer wind, and families who had extra room in the garage. You could hear the click of the shifters from a mile away, and every click reminded you that some kids were already going places, even if it was just around the block. You could hear them before you saw them. The swish of fabric, the jingle of fringe, the confidence in every step. Bell-bottoms and fringed vests were not just fashion, they were rebellion. A statement, a shrug to convention. You wore them even if your parents begged you not to. You wore them to school dances, concerts, and just because it was Tuesday. The wider the flare, the cooler the kid. The fringe had to be just right. Long enough to move when you walked, short enough to keep from dipping into your lunch tray. You did not buy these clothes to blend in. You bought them to stand out. Or maybe to finally feel like you fit in. This was the 1970s, after all. Everything was loud, from the music to the patterns to the personalities. Fashion followed suit. These outfits were inspired by music festivals, freedom marches, and late-night TV. They felt electric. And when you caught your reflection in a storefront window, just for a second, you believed you were exactly who you wanted to be. A little bold, a little weird, and 100% unforgettable. Big bags of popcorn kernels were one of the cheapest snacks a poor family could buy. Sold in plain plastic sacks, they sat in pantries for months, ready to be poured into a pot with a little oil. The popping sound filled the kitchen, and soon the air was heavy with the smell of toasted corn. Every family had their own method, whether it was shaking the pot furiously or covering it with a heavy lid and hoping for the best. Some kernels exploded so violently they bounced out onto the floor, where kids snatched them up before the dog did. Burnt or not, the giant bowl of popcorn felt like a feast for everyone crowded on the couch. Of course, half the batch was often burnt, and the other half stubbornly stayed unpopped at the bottom of the pan. Kids argued over who got the biggest bowl and sprinkled salt by the handful, trying to make it taste like the movie theater version. Even burnt popcorn was devoured quickly because it was warm, crunchy, and cost almost nothing. Popcorn was a poor kid's snack of choice, filling bellies when nothing else was around. That crinkly bag of kernels is one of the strongest grocery memories of the 1970s. Canned ravioli and spaghetti were never fancy, but they were hot and filling. Open a can, dump it in a pot or microwave, and you had a hot meal in minutes. Kids loved it, adults tolerated it, and the price, under $1, was the real selling point. Now, a single can can hit over $2, and the multi-packs that used to be budget savers now look like gourmet bundles. Even the off-brands have started creeping up. You buy less, you stockpile on sale, you debate whether lukewarm pasta with mystery meat is really worth that much. But you also remember the comfort, the weird satisfaction of biting into one of those soft, sauce-filled pockets. The sauce was never great, but it was familiar. Now it feels like even childhood food nostalgia comes with a price tag. You used to joke about canned pasta. Now it is laughing back. These things were loud, literally and figuratively. Custom name belt buckles became a full-blown trend in the 1970s, and if your name was shining in metal across your waist, you were automatically cooler. They were chunky, shiny, and spelled out exactly who you were. And trust me, only certain kids wore them. The ones whose parents took them to the mall and said, "Pick anything you want." These buckles were not just about fashion, they were about identity. In a time before social media, this was your personal brand, worn right at the center of your body. You would walk into school and bam, there it was. Tony, Michelle, Jason, like a name tag that you had to earn. It said, "I matter." It said, "Look at me." And more than anything, it said, "I am not afraid to shine." Most of us could not afford them. Maybe you had a plain belt. Maybe you had no belt at all. But the kids with custom buckles, they made sure you saw them. They would tug their shirts up just enough, stand with hands on hips, or lean against lockers so that metal gleamed in the hallway light. It was all for show, and it worked. Fruit-flavored gelatin in store brands was another treat every poor kid knew. Forget the colorful boxes of Jell-O with smiling mascots. Poor families reached for the plain white boxes with blocky lettering that simply read, "Gelatin Dessert." The packets mixed into boiling water the same way, and the wobbly, jiggling result looked just like the real thing. The colors always looked brighter than the flavors tasted, neon reds and greens that promised fruit but delivered sugar water. Moms sometimes poured it into mismatched Tupperware molds, turning out lopsided wobbles that slid around the plate. Kids didn't care if it was off-brand. Watching it jiggle was half the fun. The taste, though, was always a little off, more sugary water than fruit flavor. Kids poked at it with spoons, laughing as it trembled, and sometimes mothers added canned fruit to give it more substance. Even off-brand gelatin was enough to feel like a party when served in little bowls after dinner. It was cheap, easy, and stretched a few cents into a family dessert. No poor kid forgot that wobbly, neon-colored treat sitting in the fridge, waiting for supper to be over. Which of these forgotten 1970s snacks would you dare to taste again? Share your pick in the comments, hit that like button if nostalgia made you hungry, and subscribe so we can keep unwrapping more delicious memories from the past together.